All right, 15% tariffs on our biggest trading partner. I was at the New York Stock Exchange in recent weeks. A lot of people were saying to me, essentially, 15%, that's the new zero. It seems to be a number that's palatable to the market. Do you agree with this idea that the market can continue to move higher and that businesses can move with a certain degree of certainty with 15% tariffs?
That's the big question. 15% looks like the baseline. And that's the big question. Have we reached the point, the balance where we have tariffs at 15, we have them in a place where the president can show that he's exerting his influence on world trade without hurting the U.S. economy? The next 6 months are going to answer that question. On this deal, the European Union, this is a big win for the U.S. And if you look at where these was 3-4 weeks ago, you could see that there was a lot of hardball towards the end there because word came out is very tilted toward the U.S. Now, this is not over, and that's important to recognize. There's still some issues up in the air, pharma, timing, non-tariff barriers. So there'll be continuous negotiations. And importantly, something to think about is this is not playing well in European capitals. And President van der Leyen is getting a lot of pressure, so that will most likely influence their stance for future negotiations. But that's the big point here, Frank, is that at what level do we reach the fine point where we can change trade policy around the world, impact the deficit, bring manufacturing to the U.S. without hurting the U.S. economy? And I think we're right at that point. And again, the next 6 months are critical.
Yeah, just to your point, Carlos, Ursula von der Leyen coming out basically saying this is the best we could get, making it clear that she didn't feel like it was, an ideal deal, but it was the best they could do. I want to go back to this being the best that they could get. The president initially came out and threatened 30% tariff starting on August 1st, but he made it clear 15% was the floor. He seemed to be very firm on that one point. Does that give us any insight into the negotiations going on in Stockholm today, that the fact that the president, he has a floor in mind and that there isn't room for negotiation, but he has a certain level in mind and maybe not willing to budge from that?
Yeah, with China, it's going to be interesting because today we're at 30. And the additional 20% to get to that 30 is fentanyl. So it'll be interesting to see if there's something that the president can point to that China has improved on fentanyl or some commitments that they've made. The big thing with China now is export controls. We talked about this a few weeks ago. The U.S. is willing to look at export controls for the first time in decades, and this would be a big win for China, and especially with this new Jensen Huang doctrine, which is let's open up exports to China instead of restricting exports, because restriction just forces them to go off on their own. And I believe the president has bought into that. So that's an important negotiating tool for the president. He's willing to give up more in terms of export controls for technology. What is China willing to give up? And right now, what's important and what's on the table is energy purchases, which is a very, sensitive issue because China does business with Russia. It gets most of its energy from Russia. If China pulls back, that's a big hurt for Russia, for the Russian economy. But I think that's one of the sticking issues right now.
So it seems like we might be on pace for an extension when it comes to this tariff deadline, when it comes to China. Both sides have kind of signaled that. Kind of give us the long, game here. I don't want to call it a game because it's a very serious matter here, but just the long play. China has control of rare earths and critical minerals. That's what they have. They want our technology. How does this play out long term? Even if a deal is struck in the next couple of months, do we continue to see tension and just, tariff threats between these two countries?
Yeah, the way I think about this is China's separate from everything else. It's a separate negotiation, a separate timetable, just a separate schedule. And it's very fragile. It will always be very fragile. So they could have a good meeting in Stockholm, but a week from now, something happens and, tension rises again. But this is long term. This is all encompassing. And I think there are going to be some geopolitical issues included in this if things go well and they go to that point. Transshipments will be an issue. Mexico hasn't come up, but Mexico is also an issue in terms of transshipments and just overall Chinese presence. So it's going to get big. It will be a big agreement. And we're just at the very early stages. But export controls, rare earths, that opens the door to further negotiations. So I think we'll probably get some good news out of Stockholm. and just continue forward on this. Whether we lower tariffs down to 15 may not be now. That's a possibility, but I think the president will probably want to see more coming out of China, more other than fentanyl promises.